Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today I am so excited to have Monica DiCristina on.
Got it.
There we go. I didn't butcher it.
Yeah.
I met Monica at the last Restoration Therapy Summit. I was sitting at the desk, and Terry and Sharon Hargrave were talking, and we were looking at new books and things coming out, and there was a little
Flyer. Yeah.
Flyer on the desk, and I was like, "Oh man, Your Pain Has a Name." Like, now that's a good title.
Yeah.
And flipped the back of it and saw your face, and then we went to breakout groups to like work on stuff, and I looked across, and you were sitting there. I was like, "Oh, cool."
Yeah, it's awesome. It was great to meet you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, tell my fans and audience, the people who love this podcast, who you are and what you do and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a practicing therapist and I'm an author, as you said. I've got a new book coming out in a couple weeks called Your Pain Has a Name. And I have a private practice in Atlanta, Georgia. And then in addition to that, I have 3 kids, and I'm married, been married for 20 years, and I have 2 adorable but ridiculous dogs that are, we spend a lot of time with. So yeah, it's a full life, but a good life. And I'm excited to get this book out there.
That's awesome. So what kind of led you into doing therapy? Can we talk about that?
Yeah. That really dovetails with writing the book.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, I became a therapist because one changed my life. And so I spent about a decade with undiagnosed mental health symptoms and anxiety disorder and had no idea. And so I went to every pastor, every church service, every altar call, you name it. I was really trying to figure it out. And there were a lot of well-meaning people too in that time that wanted to help me. And it was a different time. This is like 20-something years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the father of one of my friends in college was a psychologist in a Baptist church. And so I drove to Charlotte, North Carolina, and went to the basement of a Baptist church and met a psychologist there. And that was where I really started to understand what was happening inside of me. And it was so transformative that I thought, if I can do anything, it would just be to help people understand themselves. It's such a relief to understand, what's happening inside of you. And so that's what I do today.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an awesome story. So I'm gonna parse that out a little bit. So you're from where originally?
I'm from Atlanta originally. Yes.
Okay. So you're in Atlanta. You've got kind of this backstory of trauma going on.
Mm-hmm.
You were in church already. Kind of tell me how you came to faith and how
Sure. Yeah, so I became a Christian around 17. Had some friends that were really into going to church and really into Jesus, for lack of a better word. And I had really been curious for a long time, and that was sort of what started everything for me. And what's so interesting now being a therapist is I had a sense that God could help me, and that was what drew me to God, to Jesus, but I didn't find that for so long, but my faith was so compelling that I just knew that at some point God would help me. And it wasn't in the way I thought, but God did finally really help me.
So you feel like the Holy Spirit was just kind of present and sending you kind of soothing comfort and words and just this internal sense of like, okay, God's there. He's going to do something, but I don't know what that is.
Absolutely. I had a really early sense in my faith of, wonderful counselor. That internal sense that was, when you're struggling with something, and anyone listening, when you're struggling with something and you don't know what it is, it can feel really lonely, And so that was where my faith and my relationship with God and the Holy Spirit in particular was really, really comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, hence the book title, right? Like Your Pain Has a Name. Like, I love that. Like when I was thinking about it, it's like so important. And obviously as restoration therapist, like being able to go, okay, you've got to name that specific thing, that specific lie, right? That's down in there. So you're in church. The trauma, I'm assuming, was before kind of that 16, 17.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so did you go to counseling before? Did you just you said you met with pastors?
Yeah.
People kind of tried to help? No,
there was, it just, again, for people listening, it was a different time. And my hope is to be one voice and continue this tide rolling out of the stigma of mental health changing, especially in faith spaces. It just wasn't it wasn't discussed, and as my parents, really cared, they knew, and they, wanted to help me, but, going to therapy was more of like a threat, like, hey, let's get this together, let's figure this out, or you may have to do this awful thing, which will be therapy. But and none of the faith spaces that was even brought up as an option. So it wasn't even on my radar, even though I would have had the financial support to go to therapy.
Yeah. How old are you? We're about the same age, probably, huh?
About to turn 46 on Friday.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a little younger than you are, just a couple years.
Yeah.
So I'm 42. I'll be 43 this year.
Yeah.
So same thing. I mean, I grew up my mom works for the Louisiana Baptist Convention. So I was at like youth conferences and these things my whole life, had tons of trauma early on. And then I joined the military.
Wow. Yeah.
And after 9/11 and probably after Afghanistan, I fell apart and had to get in counseling.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I'd ever heard the word trauma.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard that in church through all the, speaking and talking. And Jesus was kind of this thing where it's like, you need more of him or you need to pray more. And I'm like, well, where is he? Because I want to like pull him out of the air and like, get him to come do this thing.
Yep.
So very similar and funny stories.
That is really,
But I think a lot of us at our age who are, either working on this stuff or trying to do good integration of psychology and theology, it's because of like the lack of it, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It really is the lack of it. I was memorizing everything. I was putting on the armor of God. I was going to every altar call. You name it, I was doing it. And it just, what can happen is it can leave you feeling even more broken, right? It can leave you feeling like, wow, there actually is something really wrong with me. But what it is it's just the wrong diagnosis, Yeah.
No, that's great. Yeah, because if it's performative in the sense that you think, if I pray enough, if I do the things enough, then I'll find perfect peace. And if I'm not finding peace, it must be because I'm not doing enough or being obedient, or I haven't figured out. Even it's funny, at the anxiety retreat this last week, I was telling her before that I went to an anxiety retreat with Restoration Therapy, who were doing these new pilot programs, and we went to the Chick-fil-A thing. But anyway, in the thing, you draw a picture of your thoughts and your inner, kind of pain cycle. Yeah. And mine was these two thought bubbles. One was really dark and black and had eyes all over it. And the other one was an equation. And the middle was peace. And it was less than an exclamation mark, which is me performing, and then less than the question mark, which is me over, ruminating. Yeah. And it's just that same idea of like, what's the equation for peace? Like, what's the thing I need to work out, and I can do the dance and the intellectual thinking or the praying or the obedience, and peace will come.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of great, and there was, I would say, was a lot of great material out there, but there was sort of this implicit promise. I would pick up these books that were great books, but that would sort of promise you, if you do this Bible study, if you complete this book, you will be at peace at the end. And it just wasn't my experience at all, because again, it was the wrong medicine for what I was struggling with.
Absolutely. And I think the difference between peace and comfort are very different things well. And they may have led to more peace had we kind of seen it rightly. More
connection. Yeah.
Yep. But when we're in pain, right, we're looking, there's this negative part of us, the human part of us that's looking for comfort for our pain.
Yeah.
When in fact, like, comfort's not really necessarily what we need. Peace is what we need, but that's not always comfortable.
That's true. It's absolutely. And I think peace comes often from clarity and understanding, not necessarily from a solution, because sometimes there isn't a solution,
Absolutely. And there's also sometimes can be information. Church can be a lot of information exchange.
Yeah.
But not a whole lot of experiential embodying of what that information's about.
Yeah. And I think of it just as like adding the word "and." The teachings are essential and great, and the foundation for my peace. And sometimes there's something else going on in someone's life. We just need to add the "and." You might have an anxiety disorder, right? It's not either or. It's "and."
Yeah, absolutely. It's good. So that led you into the basement with this psychologist. This is like Fight Club. What is going on with this basement?
I know. It sounds so weird, but it was so weird for me.
We don't talk about the basement.
I know.
The first rule of therapy.
Yeah. It was so A, I'd never been to a Baptist church. B, I'd never met a psychologist. C, I'd never been in a church basement. So it was so many things for me that felt really overwhelming. And then there was this little man, Dr. Barnes, who he just wasn't worried about what I was worried about. He wasn't shocked. He was totally calm, and he started to give me names for my pain. He started to outline what I had experienced was trauma. What I thought was my fault wasn't my fault. That thoughts are just thoughts. All of these things that you and I now as practicing therapists, it might be common language, but it's not to someone in pain who's never heard that. It was revolutionary, for me to walk into this room terrified and walk out thinking, maybe I'm not losing it. Maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe I'm hurting and I have trauma and I have anxiety and intrusive thoughts, but that's different than my identity. And I think that's why naming your pain is so important.
Man, that's so good. Yeah, we were actually talking about this yesterday. Was it me and maybe me and the Hargraves were talking about it over breakfast, but I was saying, it's you said it earlier, like there's nothing wrong with me. And clearly, right, anxiety disorder is something wrong, right? But it's in the same way it's judgment. Like when we say things like only God can judge me, it's like, that's worse, right? Like the God of the universe looking at you and judging you is worse than me doing it. Right. And also people are like, we shouldn't judge anybody. And it's like, well, we shouldn't judge anybody's worth and value, right? Their identity. We can certainly look at something and say, this is not good for you. This is unhealthy. And I feel like even within the mental health field and kind of Instagram therapy, there's been a lot of mix up in using these words and thinking we're all saying the same thing.
That's so true. I think that is such an important thing to call out. With all pretty much popular words at this point, it's just kind of, they can lose their meaning, But I think so much to be specific with what you're talking about is separating identity from behaviors, identity from struggle, right? Yep. That you are loved and beloved and you may really need to change your behaviors,
Absolutely.
Both can be true.
But we've spent so much time in the church. I'm working on another book.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm about 60% through. I guess I haven't talked about that. I don't maybe mention it on the podcast, but it's about discipleship in the church and living a principled life from a therapeutic kind of mind state in an oversaturated therapeutic church. Like we spent so much time kind of not having any of this. And now we're saturated where it's like we almost think we know what we're talking about, but we haven't really clarified it and codified it yet. And then, therapy and now ChatGPT is like, oh, everybody knows everything. And you're like, guys, we're not saying the same thing.
That's so true.
Let's clarify some points. So,
I feel like everyone is a therapist at this point. Like I say this in quotations of people listening, and again, too far of a swing, but a positive swing if we're destigmatizing pain and people are getting help.
100%.
But too far of a swing if we're just throwing out words and we don't even know what they mean.
Yeah, somebody the other day, we were talking about gaslighting, and I was like, listen, just because somebody doesn't agree with you is not gaslighting. Like, stop saying that.
That's right. These are not the same thing.
Or Terry would say, like, I'm so tired of hearing about boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely, because it totally gets misused,
I mean, they're great. Used correctly.
Essential. But sometimes we're not talking about boundaries.
Talking about cutoff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or like, I just don't want to do something and I'm afraid to own that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm calling it a boundary.
100%. I need to do a whole podcast on this, but it's like, or saying, if you affect my mental health at all, then you're not worth it or whatever post you see. And you're like, okay, well then you'll have no friends and no people and not ever sacrifice for anybody. Because everything affects your mental health negatively.
100%. Yes, that has gone way too far.
Yeah. Anyway, tangent ended.
Yes.
Okay, so you go down in the basement. You have this amazing experience where you feel seen and you feel known, and he starts to name your pain.
Yep.
And that trajectory just led to, I'm assuming, healing.
It did lead to healing, but it wasn't the healing that I had prayed for. And I think that's an important thing to name too, is that sometimes the thing we're praying for comes differently, right? My prayer, if I'd had my way, it would have been that I felt amazing. I never had another scary, anxious thought or another intrusive thought ever again. But what happened instead was that I learned what it was. I learned not to fear it. I learned to do what to do when it happened again. You know, and I think that that's an important thing for us to name, like what healing and mental health really looks like. Is not like you're skipping through the flowers and you never have a hard feeling again. It's knowing what to call it and knowing what to do when it comes and knowing that it's not who you are. You know, it's separate from who you are.
That's so good. And that like you have to live your life. You know, that you've got to figure out how to live your life with these things, with these struggles.
Yep.
And that, you know, sometimes God will bring a miracle and those things will snap out of it. You know, you hear those stories where people are like, man, I had this moment. I've never drank again. I've never looked at porn again. I've never lost my temper again. I've just became a person. And you're like, man, can I get some of that?
I love those stories. I love those stories.
But it's not always everybody's.
That's right. And it's funny you bring that up because I don't think I wrote about this in the book, but it was one of the darkest nights for me was hearing one of those testimonies at the student whatever student ministry it was that I was in college. And it was this guy walked into a church, walked out, boom, 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 everything. And I remember sitting there, I was on like year 8 or 9 of struggling. And I thought, wow, I guess healing isn't for me, you know? And so I think, again, the word I think it's important we have both types of stories, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Those stories and then the stories of, and then God taught me what anxiety was. And now I'm a therapist and help people with the same thing, you know?
Yeah. You know, you look at, I think of the storm stories in the Bible and you think of, you know, the moment where the disciples are freaking out and Jesus is over there just sleeping, chilling, and they wake him up and he like stops the storm instantly, you know. But then you have the other story where, you know, there's a storm happening. Jesus isn't there. They see him. He gets in the boat and it just says that he rode the storm with them to the shore.
Yeah.
You know, that he doesn't always stop it right there in the moment.
There you go.
And both are part of our sanctification journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Then if we're really honest, there's lots of storms that he stopped that we didn't even know were storms. You know, things that he saves us from and on his own initiates in our life.
Yep.
We want particular ones.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah. I definitely struggle with OCD a little bit and obsessive intrusive thoughts and have been really working on that in therapy for a very long time.
Yeah.
And naming it, and someone, you know, I had a therapist one time, we were talking about, I was doing a lot of sexual addiction work, a lot of sexual trauma work, a lot of human trafficking work. And I was just overly saturated. Yeah. So I would go home and I would, you know, walk in and I'd try to give my kids a bath and think about some traumatic event. And I was just so frustrated being like, man, I don't want to see my kids in this light. I just want to have perfect comfort and peace. Right. And I was sitting with a therapist and she said, well, Clint, if you hung drywall all day. Yeah. And you did crown molding. Every room you walked in, you would look at the drywall and the crown molding.
There you go.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I've literally never thought, you know, but I'm not around people or very many people who do what I do. So I'm like, no, of course they don't think what I think, but they have their own thoughts and their own intrusive things going on.
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. The process isn't unique, but the way it, you know, the way it comes out is, and that was such a. That's it didn't make them go away, but like you said, it named the pain, it named the insecurity, and then I was able to at least go, okay, well, that's what this is.
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
and then you can. Then you can, once you know what it is, you can be like, well, that's annoying, you know, but it doesn't have to ruin my night and just let it go. You know what I mean? And and that's the power of education, really, and knowledge and naming stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then you get through that with him. Is this like a group therapy session or is this like a one-on-one thing? Like
this is a one-on-one psychologist. Yeah. And then I start, you know, he taught me, you know, how to start to, one of my favorite things he taught me was to tap my watch and say, right on time. Anytime a scary thought came, just be like, oh, there you are, right on time, to take the fear out of it.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, isn't that good? I use it with my clients all the time. Be like,
I'm stealing it.
There it is. Or if you're anxious about, you know, a presentation, even something less scary, you know, feeling, yep, there it is. There's my scary thought, right on time. It's good to see you again, buddy. You know, it just takes the fear out of it, right? And so that's what I started to do. And, you know, and then I really soon after that felt sure. I remember sitting in a Dunkin' Donuts with my now husband and just said, like, this is what I want to do. I want to help people be free. This is it. And so then, you know, I went to graduate school and started that work. Gordon Conwell.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So what got you into the restoration therapy stuff?
Great question. Friend.
Okay.
So one of my friends that I came to the summit with, I have two best friends that are also therapists, and it's really a dream. We share office space, we share walls, our kids are best friends. It's really amazing. Really fun. Yeah. And so one of them is has more energy than all of us and always has ideas, and they're usually good ideas 99.9% of the time. And so she said, hey, I heard about the Hargraves, or she had done Relate Strong or something, their relationship courses, and said we should go to California and train with them. And I went on faith in her. And so I got there and we did level 1 with Terry at Fuller when he was still at Fuller.
Yep.
And I was hooked. Really, as a therapist, you so desperately want to help people that sometimes it feels like you're reinventing the wheel. Each session, like I'm,
starting over. Yeah.
Cobbling together a therapy model for this individual. And restoration therapy really gave me an organizing model that I felt like I didn't have to do that,
Absolutely. Yeah. So I met Terry and Sharon their first quarter at Fuller.
Okay.
So it was my first class and their first class.
Okay, that's awesome.
So I didn't know anything different.
Yeah.
So I told him this weekend, I was like, I've been ruined for like 17 years because all I knew was what you guys do.
Yeah.
And I loved it so much. I liked EFT at the time a little bit too. It was one of the ones where I was like, yep. Jim Farrow was one of my professors. And so I loved Jim. So it was like, oh, I love this. Mm-hmm. But I've just always kind of gone back to restoration over the years. And then, like 5 years ago, right before COVID, I think, which is crazy to say that's how long ago that was.
Yeah, that is crazy.
I was like, oh, there's a certification for this? I've just been doing this for 10 years, winging it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so went back, got the first one, and then, finished the rest, or working on finishing the rest. And
that's great.
And then getting reconnected to the summit, which I really was looking forward to.
That was great.
That was such an incredible time. Mm-hmm. He told that story. Or remember when he told the story about Nowen?
Yeah.
So I asked him about that this weekend. Mm-hmm. I was like, Terry, was that like anecdotal, like my friend Nowen, like you were reading this book or whatever? So he told me this story, but the quote that he said that goes along with what we were saying for people to understand, he said, he struggled with depression, and Henry Nowen said, you're waiting to be done with the depression, but you need to learn to live, with the depression essentially.
Yeah.
And, just that moment of like clarity. I mean, we're going to have anxious thoughts. We may have some depression. We may have some clinical issues from our trauma.
Yeah.
We can't wait around to live our life until it's all gone.
That's right.
And that's heaven.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We're going to be in process until we die. Right. And I think that that's a really important distinction for people, because I think we live in a before-after society, the before picture, the after picture, the before renovation, the after renovation.
Right. And as if your fitness journey just stays the same, right?
Right. And we think we can do that with our emotional and mental health, and we just can't. And I think calling that out really helps people feel a little bit more free. Like, I can have a great day and also feel anxious. Both are true. That's so freeing. It takes the power back from these struggles too,
Yeah. So you went on, your MFT?
LPC.
LPC. Okay.
Yeah. So,
And master's level, is that what did you go for a doctorate or no?
I didn't. And I'm still thinking about it. I mean, I have too many kids and dogs right now. But I still toy with the idea. Maybe once everybody's out of the house.
That's right. I was laughing because there were so many people there this weekend at the retreat with, Dr. So-and-so, and they all had their doctorates in MFT. And I'm like, I have no desire to go back and do more school.
That.
I like to write on my own and do this kind of stuff. And I'm going to put energy and effort into like writing or writing. It's going to be to like put some content out and like,
that's good.
Make better what I'm good at. Not that I don't want to learn. I love learning.
Sure. Well, you're always learning, to be fair. I'm sure as a pastor, and I know as a therapist, you constantly are learning. Mm-hmm. Like, it's part of the job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you go into practice, doing your MFT thing. Yeah. And so how long did you do that before this book started bubbling up in your head?
Probably, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this book for,
since the basement.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Maybe 10 years I've been thinking about this book. Like, I started working and I had some frustrating experiences with a center, and then I went and trained under a trauma therapist, and then I decided I wanted to stay home with my kids. So I stayed home with my kids for probably like 3 or 4 years and then went back to therapy. And one of the things that ties into the book, I'll tell you how, that I decided when I went back to practice was, and this shows my youngness as a therapist, was when I go back, I want to let myself be a whole authentic person, because I'd been trained so traditionally that you barely let the clients know your last name, and you just, it felt very suffocating. And I'm a very creative person, and I did want to write, and I thought, I'm going to do this differently. So that was the beginning, was that permission of I'm going to be the kind of therapist that's a whole person.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be some suit that is inaccessible. And
That's
so,
great.
yeah, that was part of it. And then I started writing, started the podcast, and yeah, I remember where I was sitting when the title popped in my head. I was just sitting there at my desk, and I was like, "Oh, wow, that's it. That's it."
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd had the idea,
Of
but
course.
you know how it goes, right?
I
I had,
do. Yeah. The building better bridges thing just popped in my head one day,
yeah.
and I was like, "Oh, that's good."
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of when you're thinking about the concept and you're formulating the book and like what is the thesis and all that stuff. It's like God just gives you, these little nuggets of gifts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so how long did it take you to kind of get that going? Did you go through a publisher? How did all that work?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a long journey. I don't know what your journey was like. I got an agent, and the fact that she believed in me felt encouraging, because I tried to meet another agent through a nice person, and she was like, "I have too many therapists. Like, I can't work with you." And I was like, "All right, I'll keep looking." So I found an agent, and then she, shopped around my book proposal, and shopped around to different publishers, and then we got offers and chose like, okay, this person feels good, this doesn't, and that's how it happened. But then once I was with the publisher, it was I had a hard run of it,
Yeah.
and that's a story for another time. It's still too
Okay.
fresh.
Yeah. Okay. I get that.
But it was hard, and so the book got delayed, and I actually had to write it a second time. So I wrote this book twice, and
Man.
yeah, and I love this version, and I feel like it really ended up being a God thing. I ended up working with this editor, this older man named Ken, who had written a lot of books in the 90s, and it felt very much like a Karate Kid movie. He very much was sort of telling me to do things I thought were nuts, and it really worked. And so I rewrote the entire book, and here we are. So it's a long journey.
Yeah. Is it out or is it?
It's coming out May 13th.
May 13th,
so it's just
yeah.
like we're almost right there. And I've
That's
got
great timing.
Yeah, the marketing team is awesome. Like, they've been really, really great.
Yeah. Well, I know you got a million things, so I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, mine was very not similar in that sense, but same way. I'd reached out to Terry and Sharon. It was during COVID when I had first kind of thought about it and started, kind of processing it. I was actually working on this discipleship book.
Wow.
And really going on some retreats. And I meet with a lot of churches and pastors around the country, see a lot of pastors, speaking about the book stuff before I had a book. And then I was on a podcast. I think it was Brainy Moms, which is a national podcast. And it's two ladies who were both psychologists. And
awesome.
They were like, wait, what? And I remember they paused the podcast, and were like, we're doctors and we've never really thought of this concept, of sexual neglect.
Oh, yeah.
And so we stopped and talked about it. And so then we went live again, so they had me come back again. And then they knew one of them had done a TED Talk. And so it was time for like the TED stuff to happen. And so TED sent me an email. One of the guys who was putting it on, it was like, hey, we'd love for you to come and pitch.
Yeah.
And so I had to prepare I think it was like a minute and a half speech or something to do for the pitch.
Yeah.
Man, I was so nervous. I love speaking in front of people, but like having to say something perfectly is like
in 1.5 minutes to distill the whole message.
Yeah. And then you have to spend, months getting a 9 minute, exactly 9 minutes and do not go over.
Wow.
So that was just, a lot of effort and energy. So out of that, then the book kind of concept came out and started working on it. And so I called Sharon and talked to her, and I was like, hey, should I go through a publisher? I'd reached out to some agents, hadn't heard anything in like 3 months.
Yeah.
And I had 50 things booked for the next year or two.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this book's done. I had an editor that I loved, and she did a great job and was very relational, and that was a really good experience. And so I just decided to self-publish because it was like, man, I just got to get this out here, and I'm going everywhere. And, that's been great. I mean, for me, it's been good. Ended up in Walmart and Barnes and Noble, and
that's amazing.
So it's in places, but right now the next one, I'm like, okay, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll start pitching it now, and kind of the general concept, and finish it up as they, as they pick it up.
As they pick it up. Yeah, that's awesome. That's
really
awesome.
I think most people don't even know how any of that works. I thought that'd be fun to talk about for a second.
No, yeah, they really don't. And I think both stories are super important to hear, because I think it's, being faithful to something you feel called to put out there, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of bumps on the road, there
Yeah.
really are. It's a challenge to stay faithful to that,
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that was
Mhm.
so tough, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like you said, I'm glad God is
Yeah.
obviously using it to sharpen and shape
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
but those moments are so hard,
So
when you
hard.
put so much vulnerability into it and so much risk
Mhm.
into it.
Yep.
And I'm very much like you. Being just an authentic therapist and not wanting
Yeah.
to be a suit, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't realize how strongly that was influenced by Terry and just the way he presented and
That's a
sharing.
good point. Mhm.
My wife and I were in their first Relate Strong. It was called Healthy Marriages, Successful Ministries, or something
It's
like
had so
that.
many names. Yeah.
Originally, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we went through that in grad school in
That's
'08 or
great.
'09. And
Mhm.
so I just didn't know any other way. But like you just
Yeah.
you share your pain cycle. You kind of disclose a little bit of
Mhm.
information about you to help the client, and
Yeah.
but then I came back to Louisiana. It was like, what?
Yeah.
Nobody's saying anything. And I
So
was going to
true.
therapy, and it was just like, ugh. I went
Yeah.
through 4 or 5 therapists because it was just like so
Yeah.
cold and distant
Yeah.
and like disconnected, and nobody
Mhm.
laughed about anything. And I was
That's
just like, why are
terrible.
y'all so serious?
I know. Yeah.
I know I'm
Yeah.
jacked up. Laugh about it a little bit with me.
But really, and the research supports that a good relationship with the therapist is best indicator of the outcome.
Sure.
And it just like it's really important to be human, I think. And of course, some of us are more fun or funny than others, of
Of
course, but
course.
I mean, I think there really is something to that. And having been, which you've been also a client myself, I know how intimidating it can be. And I just
Hmm.
want people to feel safe and comfortable. Nothing's gained by people not feeling safe and comfortable and, that things can be laughed at.
Yep. I'll tell you
Mhm.
this funny story. I had been
Yeah.
to therapy, lots of times over the years, but got
Mhm.
back to Louisiana. This was probably, I want to say like 2012. I was
Mhm.
looking for a new therapist. Did not want to go. I had
Yeah.
avoided, put it off. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
busy. I can't do it.
Yeah.
So then I show up, and it's at a hospital here. And I'm like, I do not want to go
Mm.
to this hospital, but it was a private
Mhm.
practice guy. I'd heard good things about it. And they had just kicked everybody out, and he was the last one that could still keep his office. So
Wow.
I walk in and there's an elevator, but they're redoing the whole hospital. And I
Yeah.
took a picture of it. I need to post it in the show
Yeah.
notes. But it was like they had scraped the walls clean of everything because they were repainting. So it just looked like a padded cell, the
Yeah.
elevator, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
and so I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. So I
Where am
take a
I?
picture and send it to my wife. I'm like, here, I'm going inpatient today. And I go upstairs and he's not there. He had missed the
Oh.
session because he had a
Oh,
court
man.
date and they had forgot to call and cancel it. So I'm like, I'm done. I'm not going back to therapy. It's a
Yeah.
sign.
Yeah.
I did go back the next
Yeah.
week, and
Yeah.
he was my therapist for 9 years.
Oh, wow. That's
Yep,
an awesome story.
and then sad part, he passed away during COVID, and
Oh my
so I'd had like a
gosh.
last session with him, and then I saw him. Everybody's going to Zoom, and I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
really into Zooming, so I went and did some equine therapy, and
Yeah.
because it was outside and we could do distancing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I saw him at my haircut at the same place I
Mhm.
get my haircut, which I'd never
Mhm.
seen him. And so I gave him a hug, talked to him, showed him pictures, but he looked really bad. And so he said, I've been really sick. And he's like,
Oh
I'm
my
so glad to
gosh.
see you and so glad to see you're doing well. And I was like, I'm thriving and doing really well, because I hadn't seen him in
Wow.
probably a year.
Mhm.
And then like 2 weeks later, I went back to get my haircut and they were like, we're sorry about, so and so.
Oh my
And I was like,
gosh.
oh man. So for people out there,
Wow.
like these things happen.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
and you have to push through it. And whether you're
Yeah.
writing as a therapist and thinking I
Right.
can't do this or I can't do a podcast,
Right.
or whether you're a client who is going, no, there's too many barriers.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
we've got to do it. You've got to
Yeah.
push through. God is going to
Yeah.
use all that mess to make
Yeah.
beauty.
Yeah. And follow that, whatever's pulling you forward. Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely.
That is a real story. I'm so sorry about your therapist.
Oh, it's
That's really
okay.
sad. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
luckily that was 5 years ago, so I
Yeah.
found
Yeah.
somebody else. I'm doing
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into
Yeah.
the book while we got some time
Yeah.
left.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
So tell me, kind of how this book is, what it's about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why readers need to get it. I mean, I know, but let's
Yeah.
let you
Yeah.
tell it.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So, as the title says, your pain has a name, and it's a therapist's invitation to understanding your story and sorting out who you are from what hurts. And I had to fight for that subtitle because I didn't want a subtitle that so much self-help does, which promises live your best life now. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
want to do that.
Literally.
Literally, I mean, I wanted to offer people something real. It's, sorting it out. We're gonna sort and sift all this pain, and we're going to separate it from the identity, of who God made you to be. And
Mhm.
so in the book, I've heard a lot of people say the book is kind of like going to therapy, even though it can't replace that, but there's a cadence to it where, like we're doing, like not a real therapist in real life wouldn't do this, but I share my story first, just to kind of go first,
Mhm.
like here's my vulnerable story. Here's what I know now. Here's what I didn't know then, and then I walk people through why we don't name our pain. There's so many reasons. Like we get dismissed, to use our earlier term, gaslit, less often, but, we encounter that. So many things, we get the wrong diagnosis, literally or figuratively,
Mhm.
so often, and we don't learn to listen to ourselves. And so I kind of walk people through why we don't find names, and then we look at different names. And this is where I really struggled writing the book, that there's so many things we can all struggle with. And so I really had to pick and choose, some different things to go into. I went into trauma, I went into family of origin, different things to help equip people to name these pains,
Mhm.
and grief, anxiety. And then finally, this is where the restoration therapy that we share comes in at the end, is I help people separate their pain from how they coped, and their pain from the truth of who they are. And that's really the coming home, and what I find is that if you don't name your pain, it will name you.
Mhm.
And that was my lived experience. That's what I've seen with so many clients. And so it's in naming that you really find your name again.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll this weekend, I've been doing restoration therapy for 17 years now, 16 years
Mm-hmm.
technically, 15 in practice. And so I've known my cycle, I've known that I feel
Yeah.
unknown, or I've known that I feel not good enough or whatever. And this weekend at the anxiety retreat, I realized I had not had anybody do restoration therapy to me,
Oh,
since Terry and
yeah.
Sharon, like,
Yeah. Yes.
so
Yeah. Same, actually. Yeah.
and so I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm standing on this like table, and we're talking about like naming my feelings, and
Yeah.
naming what the lie is, and I'm like telling kind of the stories and giving these
Mm-hmm.
examples of what happened to me, and one of the therapists just named it for me. She was like, it sound that empathetic
Mm-hmm.
conjecture,
Yeah.
and she was just like, it sounds like this, and I was like, holy crap,
You're like, that's
yes,
it.
that's it.
Yeah.
And so then I had to play with it for a minute to kind of make it my own. And it was, just so good and kind, and like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just saturated for the last
Mm-hmm.
week of like, man, I do this a lot. Like I find myself,
Yeah.
going back to this lie,
Yeah.
instead
Mm-hmm.
of, walking
The
in that
truth.
truth. Yeah.
And once you name that lie, like I think about the lie like a sound machine. If people have kids that you
Hmm.
put outside the door to let them sleep, or even therapist's office, or like the noise on an airplane, like you don't hear it until you
Hmm.
hear it. And
Right.
then when you really start to hear it, you notice it everywhere, and it's really freeing to separate yourself from it. Otherwise, it's just the background noise all the time. I'm unworthy, or I'm not good enough, or something's wrong with me. You don't realize you're kind of swimming in that all the time until you start to hear it.
Yeah, and it's the lens that everybody sees everything through.
That's
And
right.
so, as
Yes.
you start to name it, there's, the forgiveness model, right? You get to
Mhm.
go, oh wait,
Yeah.
maybe I was thinking about this. Well, I can't really tell that story. Let's see. It was
Yeah.
too detailed about my
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's fine.
can. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a situation that happened, where I walked out of my bedroom as a kid, and there was,
Mhm.
a conflict with my parents,
Mhm.
and I thought it was one thing my whole life. And then in like I'm
Mm.
at 25, I hear
Yeah.
another version of the story, and it just like, oh, well, but at
Yeah.
7, like that's all I saw. I thought
Absolutely.
this person
Yes.
hurt this person, when in
Yeah.
reality, this person's cleaning up their own mess that they made, that I thought the other
Yeah.
person, and so you
Wow.
can build these narratives, and I've talked to my parents about this and said, well, no one named that for me, right? As a
Mhm.
kid, it's so important as a parent, when
Mhm.
there's conflict, when there's a rupture, when there's something that's confusing, to make sure
Mhm.
you go in and say, hey, this
Yep.
is what happened. This was
Yes.
not your fault. This was
That's
not
right.
their fault. This is what I was doing, and this is what I'm working on, and this is who God is. And
Mhm.
then we don't, like you said, we don't have these like silent lies that are just flitting underneath there that have
Totally.
created this lens that we see people, God, and ourselves through.
Absolutely. I love that. It's such a perfect example of what literally happens to so many of us. We make conclusions. There's not a narrator over your life. There's not a
Right.
narrator that interrupts you and says, "Hey, oh wait, you got it wrong. Wait, stop there. Don't
Yeah.
conclude that." You just go forward, right? Wouldn't that be helpful?
I love that. It's so good.
But you just
The
go
Holy Spirit
forward.
tries, but we don't
That
listen.
tries. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And you go forward with these conclusions about yourself, about relationships, about like with our restoration theory, about identity and safety in the world, and you just don't know any different, right? Until you're able to name that. And I really think it's like you said, so important with kids. And I mean, I don't know if it'll happen, but my hope with the publisher is talking about making a kids version of this book, like
Cool.
teaching kids to name their pain,
Yes.
I mean, which is what we're all doing anyway as parents. We're giving them language for their experiences. But the more we can do that, hopefully the less of these false narratives we can have,
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I think it's important to mention at that point, so much of us too in our marriages, when we're in pain, we try to like co-regulate each other, and that
Yeah.
ends up being codependence and just chaos.
Yeah.
And we teach people to self-regulate. But with kids, naming their pain, it's so important for parents to realize you have to be regulated, and your
Yeah.
job is actually to co-regulate your kids.
That's right.
So
That's
they
right.
can learn to regulate. And so in the book that I wrote, teaching people, I call it talking to the right brain, but helping
good.
them like imagine there's an arrow pointing to your child's right brain and
Yeah.
just blinking and saying, hey, show me empathy and sympathy and connection. Don't try to
Yes.
teach, because this is
Yes.
off. This is completely turned off. And so,
Yes.
so many times, right, parents, we go in, we're in our pain. We see their pain makes us go into our pain cycle, and then we go, oh, no, let's get factual.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay. This is
Yeah.
not bad. Your boyfriend's not,
Right.
you love your life. We start teaching, and all that does is dysregulate everybody. And so I try to teach in the book, like the first sign of you realizing that you're dysregulated is that
Yeah.
you're trying to teach before showing connection, empathy, and sympathy.
So good. I'm gonna pocket that and use that in my own life and in therapy. That's so good.
Yeah.
Because it's so true. And I can think of moments where I've been dysregulated with my kids. I had really, really go into a really great speech, just really telling them stuff and it's not working, and
Nope.
that's not what they needed,
Yep.
and I needed to regulate myself first. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we know that
good.
as marriage, as people that are
Yeah.
in marriages, right? Is like
Yeah.
if you're upset and your husband says, just calm down,
Doesn't work.
never in the history of arguments has
it's never
anybody
worked.
told their wife to calm down and it's gone well.
No, it's just like noise.
But again, that insight and explaining like this is why that happens.
Yeah.
Your brain literally doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
People go, oh,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings me to, I'm sure you know this term by Dan Siegel, name it to tame it. Just that if, naming what you're feeling really actually helps your brain calm down.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think one of the things I hope with this book is to destigmatize struggle. I think so often we skip this important step you're saying because we think we should just be calm all the time and that we should never be triggered and we should just be the best, versions. And that ends up hurting us because it's just not realistic, So
That's
the more
right.
realistic we can get about it's okay to struggle. And if you can just stop and deal with that rather than acting that out, everyone's going to be better off.
That's so good. Yeah, it makes me think of the difference between, you said triggered, because that's another one of those used.
Oh, yeah.
I send so many gifts to people about trigger. They're like,
Yeah.
but it's like the difference between triggered and reactive.
Yes.
Right. So it's
that's
like
right.
triggered is, just for people listening, triggered is when you walk into a situation and something hits you from left field. You have no ability to dysregulate or regulate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And calm down because you don't even know what hit you and you're figuring it out later. Reactive is, I've already been to therapy. I already know what my pain cycle is. I already know what my trauma is. I'm going into this, phone call or this meeting worried that I'm going to feel XYZ. I go in, as soon as I feel it, I choose to yell and scream or to shut down or to walk away. I don't deep breathe. I don't name my pain. I don't do these things. Like, you're responsible for that. Yes, you have trauma, and yes, you have baggage, and yes, I can understand why you would act that way.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between being triggered and being reactive.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where some of the language has failed us, is that it drops that piece of responsibility, right? Which actually, is really freeing for people
It's
because it
empowering.
it is empowering. It makes people feel less disempowered by their pain if they know they have tools that they can use when it predictably happens again. Instead of this magical thinking that I should never have a reactive or triggered feeling or moment,
So good.
instead be responsible and but have a plan, you
Yeah.
know?
So how do you unpack that in the book a little bit?
Um, I unpack the brain a little bit, but that's where the editor really wanted me to stop.
Gotcha.
I don't go as far into as I would want to about
Yeah.
how to do that. I mean, I more sort of focus on helping them understand a little bit about the brain, like you
Hmm.
said, and then how to name it, how to validate it, and how to separate it from their identity. But I
Well, that's
don't,
good. That's what I meant.
yeah,
Like not
yeah,
the
yeah,
brain part, but do you
yeah.
what are the kind of the tools, the wrap up? What are the practical that maybe you could give
Yeah.
us on here?
Yeah, is one of the things I talk about is your creative strategies. And I had
Mm.
originally titled that brilliant strategies, but the editor thought it would sound like I was feeling sarcastic, which I wasn't. It's just that this idea that as kids, we develop these brilliant creative strategies to cope,
To survive, yeah.
to survive. And those that might be anxiety, it might be anger, it might be performing, it might be no boundaries. But then as you grow up, those don't work anymore. So it's like imagine all of us listening now if you tried to put on a t-shirt from when you were 8 years old. Like it wouldn't fit, right? It fit great then. It was a really creative and great t-shirt and it fit great in your life, but it wouldn't work now. And so that's one of the ways that I start and I use restoration therapy to talk about blame, shame,
Hmm.
control, and escape and chaos as ways that we cope with our pain and separating ourselves from that. So that's a big part of the wrap up. And then it's really this idea of that, I put several different ideas in there because I think we all think about it differently. Like who were you before the pain?
Hmm.
Who are you in spite of the pain? Who are you underneath the pain?
I like that.
What tried to take you out but didn't win?
Mm.
Who are you? And so I
So good.
really kind of walk people through that. Like this is who you are. Yes, this the problem is the problem. And it hurts and maybe you need to change some of your behaviors. But that's never been the story of who you are. And
Hmm.
so helping people kind of walk home to themselves. And I talk at the end that this is a continual process, as you and I have said. I really in this sort of world, I even took a lecture one time by an author. It's like, name a problem, then solve it, and that's kind of the way you write a book, and
Right.
I just didn't want to do that, because I felt like A, that's been done, and B, it's too short-sighted, like it's a continual process of naming your pain, returning to truth over and over again, you
Yeah.
know?
So hard to write about though, right?
Yeah, it's not flashy, and it's not
No.
a 1, 2, 3 step like people like to sell.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that there's other messages out there.
So good. Well,
Yeah.
I can't wait for it to come out, and I know it's going to be awesome for people. One, because you're a restoration therapist, and I love
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, too, just I think you're hitting something that I feel that many of us in this vein are trying to hit, which is just to be authentic
Yeah.
and to
That's
not
right.
worry about being flashy
That's
or
right.
catchy or selling a billion copies. Because
Right.
if you sell a billion copies, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I haven't read a billion copied psychology book that I thought was great. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Sure.
I'm like,
Yeah.
nah. Well, it's general information, or it's like extremely like bottle rocket. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, that feels really good to read,
Yeah.
but then there's
Right.
like nothing really substantial that I can do with it. And now
Yeah.
I need another book because there's nothing about this that's
Yes. Right.
tangible. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's like that's our world though, is we want instant
Mhm.
gratification. We go to the
Totally.
doctor and we're like, look, I don't care if it's bacterial or viral, just give me a shot.
Yeah,
You know?
totally.
And
Yep.
it's like we just want that self-soothing comfort,
Mhm.
instant
Mhm.
pill that'll give it away. And we want that in podcasts and books
Yep.
and, in therapy techniques.
Mhm.
And that's just
Yeah.
not true.
And you're right, and it's just not true, and then, when hurting people reach out for those things and it doesn't work, they're left feeling more discouraged and more
Yes.
alone, and so we just need to have a more nuanced conversation, you know?
I agree. So I'm
Yeah.
super proud of you for,
Thanks.
doing that and writing it
Appreciate
in a way
that.
that's hard. And I get that,
Yeah,
and
I
there's
know
that
you do, it's
temptation.
hard. Oh,
Yeah. It's the
yeah.
temptation of like, how do I make
Yeah.
this and the cover this
Yeah.
and how do I market it? So it's, and it's just like, why are they doing this? And, it's like,
Yeah.
ugh, that's why I don't have Instagram or, social media on my phone at all, because I'll just look at stuff and be annoyed with, why is this thing going like selling like wildfire? And it's the same thing that's been said 4,000 times.
No.
Like, this is the same book that I read 4 years ago on the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, the average person, we just don't know. And
it's a consumer model. Yep.
100%. So I just encourage you that's, the Lord will bless that. And
I appreciate that.
The people that read it will be deeply impacted by it, because it's real and it's what people need to hear.
Yeah.
And more importantly, like, you're doing that work.
Yeah.
And so you're not writing something that you haven't, one, walked through, and two, not doing with people every day.
That's
so
right.
even if somebody gets their hands on the book, hope to God they can go and find a therapist that they can go, hey, well, what about this? Or they're seeing a therapist that's not doing any of that, and they can be like, man, I probably need to find somebody else.
Yep.
And then what a gift to your clients and your community and your friends.
Yeah.
Because that's really what matters, right? It's like the sphere of influence that you have. If you can get your friends to read it, I don't know about you, but my
yeah.
Weird.
It's really interesting that, I have to say I've had the most supportive friends, but when you're writing a book, nobody cares about it as much as you do.
No.
I've just had to really accept and name that pain. Nobody and they shouldn't,
No.
But it's really, that's a journey.
Yeah. My wife is a 1 on the Enneagram and really detail oriented. And I kept, when I was writing the first 17 drafts, she was like, I'm not reading it because I'm going to rip it to shreds and you're going to feel terrible. And so now the book's out, and we were at dinner the other night, and several of my friends had texted me on vacation. They had the book and they were trying to get through it. And several of them were like, well, I'm waiting on the audiobook. I'm never going to read it, so hopefully that's going to come out at the end of the month, a year later.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But have you thought about that any? Are you doing?
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah.
Okay, you did?
It's coming out. Yeah.
Did you read it?
I did.
Okay, great.
Yeah, did you read yours?
I tried. It's like 30 hours, and so it was just like such a beating. And I did probably the first couple of chapters.
Yeah.
And I finally found a guy through Amazon that it sounded similar, had a good beat, and I was just like, it's just got to come out. I don't have the capacity to do it. You know, that was a whole mental anguish part, because I talk all the time and love to do stuff and love tonality and taking care of my reader and all that stuff. But very much like you, I wrote it in a way that was therapeutic to the reader, making sure they're held in these hard conversations. And,
that's good.
It's hard to let go of those things.
It is. Yeah. The whole thing is so much harder than it looks. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm so thankful that you came on, Monica. And
me too.
It was fun talking to you. And again, talking to people who are on the same wavelength. Yeah. It's so nice. Yeah. So nice to talk to other clinicians who, and even authors and podcasters who do those same things. The struggle's real. Parents.
It really is. The struggle is real, and it's worth it.
100%.
Yeah.
Where can everybody find your stuff? So give us that.
Yeah. So Monica DiCristina. So it's D-I and then Christina with no H. It's a common mistake. And so it's Monica DiCristina on Instagram. I think there's some Facebook stuff, but I don't even know how to use Facebook, so I don't go on there. So don't go there. But go Instagram at monicadicristina.com, and then that's where you can find my Substack, which is, in this before and after world, is my favorite place to write because it's longer form, newsletter once a week. And then the book is sold. Your Pain Has a Name everywhere where books are sold.
It's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Guys, please grab her book. It comes out, what month is it? May 13th? Yeah. I was going to say March, but I'm like, we're past that.
Yeah. Right around the corner.
Yeah. So grab it. You're going to love it. If you love the stuff that I talk about on this podcast and just the guests that we've had, this will be, I know I say this about a lot of things because I only have people on here I like. Yeah. But this really will be one of those books that if you listen to this and listen to all the episodes, we'll just filter in so many of the kind of things we've talked about and synthesize so many things for you. So please grab it. Grab the audiobook or the real book, and I can't wait for it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on. This was so fun. Yeah, I loved it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. God bless you guys. Have a good week.